Hello and welcome. My name is Daphne Adler and I'm one of the counselors here at Los Altos High School. And today I'm really happy to present for you our workshop on studying in Australia and New Zealand. New Zealand's new for us, so super excited to learn more about New Zealand as well this year. Last year, we started this event, International Universities Month, throughout the month of October, and I'm really happy to bring back our Australian reps that we had last year, who shared a lot of great info, and will do so today as well. And you'll see that there are some similarities and some differences with Australia and New Zealand. It's a great opportunity to learn about a region of the world that maybe some of our students have been to, but a lot have not, and is an amazing place to attend university. So you'll hear a lot about Australia and New Zealand in general, and studying there and how to access universities there, and then a little bit about each university that's represented today. This session is being recorded and will be available for students to view anytime on the College Career Center YouTube channel, and you can get to that from their website. All right, so without further adu, I will introduce everyone that we've got today. Next slide. So we have Leanne Allen from Macquarie University in Sydney, Tori Ellenberger from Deakin University, Todd St. Vrain from University of Melbourne, Du Bois Jennings from Education New Zealand, and Lewis Gibson also from Education New Zealand. And so I'm going to turn it over to you to start our presentation. Thanks to all of you so much for being here.
Awesome. So just as a brief introduction, we're going to just go over, get to know Australia and New Zealand. We'll talk a little bit about the benefits of an education down under, what it's like to study in Australia and New Zealand and how it differs to the US, what student life is like, the application processes, and how you finance a degree down under. So we're going to start with Australia, just to teach you a little bit about it if you're not familiar at all. So interestingly, Australia is the geographical size as the United States. So quite large, but we have a population of 25 million people, which is equivalent to about Southern California. So from the north end of Los Angeles down to the Mexican border, Australia's population fits into that small area, which is pretty wild to think. 90% of the Australian population lives within 60 miles of the coast. So we are all beach bums and we love to be close to the beach. But if you do get the opportunity to go into Central Australia, I highly recommend it. It's a pretty interesting place. There's no other area in the world, I think, like the outback Australia. A couple of trips ago when I was there, we were camping outside and it sounded like these massive trucks were about to run us over, but they were probably 20 miles away. There's just no sound barrier. There's literally nothing in the middle of Australia. 1 in 4 Australians are born overseas, so it is a very multicultural society in Australia and something we're very proud of as well. And that's shown in the diversity in cultural events and food, and all the different events that happen around Australia in the big cities and little cities and regional areas. So one very cool thing about Australia is certainly the multicultural of society, which I would definitely encourage students to get involved into when they study in Australia. Next one. Yeah, so in Australia we have 43 universities, so very different to the US. Again, I think there's about 40 universities just in Australia as part of, just in California as part of the state's system, whether UC or CSUs. As you can see here as well, they are all very much on the coast of Australia, as I was saying before. We have 40 public universities, 2 international institutions, and 1 private university. So again, very different to the US system, which is some public, some private. We're very much public-based. Universities are much bigger, I would say, than a lot of US schools. A medium-sized university in Australia is about 30,000 people. A big university has about 70,000 students, and a small university has about 20,000 students. And a majority of those universities, between 20 and 25% of the student population is international, which is again something that is very unique to Australia and something we love about our university system, is just how diverse the student body is. I think next we're going to New Zealand.
Thank you very much. Kia ora koutou. Hello, everyone. My name's Lewis, and today I'm going to give you just a kind of a bit of history of New Zealand 101 and delve into a little bit of how what makes New Zealand different. So New Zealand and Australia, we have some shared similarities and a shared Anzac spirit, but we're also two different countries with unique histories and unique cultures. And quite often, a lot of US students that I speak to aren't really aware of some of the differences. So I want to just give you a quick 101 on New Zealand history. So New Zealand is a small island nation located way down in the South Pacific. It's a few hours southeast of Australia, and it's about a 12-hour direct flight from California. It's also 12 hours to China, and it's also 12 hours to Chile. So it's kind of in the center of the world, or it's far away from everything, depending on your perspective. It's a hugely multicultural place with large populations of Pacific people, particularly Polynesians, Asians, and European people. And the New Zealand Indigenous people, the Māori, have a really strong heritage and culture, which is alive and present in everyday New Zealand society. So the history of New Zealand is pretty interesting. I'm sure you're all familiar with the movie Moana and familiar with Maui. And one of the boasts that Maui has in the movie is he fishes islands up out of the water. The mythology of New Zealand is that Maui fished New Zealand out of the water. So the top island, the North Island, is the fish that he fished up. The bottom island, the South Island, is Maui's boat. So way back in the day, there was a famous Māori explorer named Kupe who discovered New Zealand, which led to a huge migration of Māori people across the Pacific to settle in New Zealand. So again, if you refer back to the movie Moana, at the end, they all jump on their waka or boats and sail across the Pacific. That kind of thing happened and people ended up in New Zealand. So Māori people are Polynesian people, and as I said, the Māori heritage is still alive and strong in New Zealand today. So Māori sayings and language are widespread, and there are huge pushes for language revitalization right across the country, with more and more Kiwis or New Zealanders of ethnic backgrounds taking it upon themselves to learn the language. In the late or kind of mid-19th century, many Europeans started arriving. These were people sometimes leaving Australia, or they were American whalers or fishermen or other people from Europe. And to cut a long story short, there was a treaty that was signed between Māori and the British Crown in February of 1840 called Te Tiriti o Waitangi, or the Treaty of Waitangi, which was New Zealand's founding document. And it sought to secure British sovereignty over New Zealand while ensuring Māori retained rights to their own affairs and secured the rights as British citizens. However, there were key translation differences between the documents, between the English and Māori version, and the nature of colonization has led to ongoing debate and conflict on issues related to land and sovereignty. Back in 1975, there was an effort to try and right some of these historical wrongs, and the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975 was passed, which established a permanent commission of inquiry that makes recommendations on claims brought by Māori relating to Crown actions which breach the promises in the Treaty of Waitangi. So since then, over $2 billion has been redistributed from the government to New Zealand, to Māori iwi or tribes. So after the Treaty of Waitangi was signed, there was huge migration from Europe to New Zealand, which massively changed the demographics of New Zealand. In the late 19th century, there was also a gold rush, which saw huge numbers of Chinese people migrate to New Zealand. And over the last century, there's been mass migration of Pacific peoples to New Zealand. So our largest city is Auckland, up in the north of New Zealand. It's actually the largest Polynesian city in the world. And it's actually the world's fourth most diverse city. It's actually more diverse than Los Angeles, which a lot of people are surprised to hear. Similar to Australia, over a quarter of New Zealand citizens are estimated to be born overseas. And we have a history of being a really progressive country. So way back in 1893, women won the right to vote, which was a world first. And we have a really proud heritage of women in leadership, as you can see today with our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, who's known on the world stage. Beyond all that, our unique history and rich bicultural heritage, we're also known for our beautiful environment and landscapes and our friendly and our welcoming people. And if you jump to the next slide, please. We're also really lucky in New Zealand. We have a really fantastic education system. So we have 8 universities which are ranked in the top 3% of universities worldwide according to the QS Wood rankings. And the Economist Intelligence Unit ranks New Zealand as the #1 English-speaking country for preparing students for the future. Our 8 institutions are public universities and are comprehensive, meaning you can study a wide range of subjects and almost anything under the sun. And we're based on the British education system. So undergraduate degrees are 3 years in length, and you go right into your major of study. And with that, I'm going to throw it back to who's next.
I think that's back to me. So we're just going to give a quick snapshot on the differences between US and Australia and New Zealand education. Both of our countries were designed or the education systems were based on the UK system. So there's a lot of similarities there as well. And we are pretty identical with the way that the university systems do work. So as Lewis touched on, most of the degrees, I'm going to say down under is easier than saying Australia, New Zealand, are 3 years in duration because we don't have general education requirements. One thing you do need to know though is what you want to study before you're applying to the university. So you can't go in undecided. You do have flexibility to change once you are in the university. It may mean that your degree is extended, depending on at what point you choose to change majors and what classes you've already taken. But generally speaking, it should be a 3-year degree program that you are studying. And you need to know what you want to study at the time of application because you are being assessed for that particular degree as opposed to just entry into the university like in the US. So all our requirements very much differ depending on what degree you would like to study. I did say mostly our degrees are 3 years in duration, but there are some exceptions to that rule. A lot of our professional programs are actually 4 years in duration. So you can do a law degree out of high school, which takes 4 years to complete. If you wanted to come back to California and practice, you would just need to do a 1-year LLM, which is a Master of Laws, and then you would be able to sit the bar exam. So it can be a really attractive option to study a professional degree in Down Under because it reduces the time of overall study. Another example of that is veterinarian sciences. It's 5 years at our universities compared to about 8 years here in the States. Psychology and engineering are also 4-year degree programs because they have an honours degree in the 4th year, which you need to complete to meet the accreditation processes and further study requirements. Medicine is also an interesting one that you can do at undergraduate level in our countries. So it's usually a 6-year degree program to graduate from high school to finishing a medical degree compared to about 10 years here in the States. So for anyone thinking pre-med, it could be a really great option to study Down Under. Grades are based on overall performance on assignments here in the States, whereas Down Under, it can be really grade heavy and exam heavy, sorry. So you may just have 3 or 4 assessments per class, per semester, which will make up 100% of your final grade. Some classes are pretty brutal and you do 1 exam, which is 100% of your grade at the end of the semester, and that's that. So students do need to be a little more independent when they are studying outside of the US because you don't have that constant pushing and quizzing from your teachers. And yeah, quizzes happening every week, which will tell you where you're at. In Australia, it may be Down Under. It may be 25% of your grade will be a mid-semester essay, 25% might be a presentation during a tutorial, and then 50% might be a final exam or essay. So something to keep in mind. Applications are a little bit different as well. As I briefly stated at the top, you do need to know what you want to study when you enter the universities, and your eligibility is based on what you want to study. So some courses are a lot harder to get into than others. But generally you apply direct to the university. Most offer rolling admission, so you can apply at any time in your senior year. And often it is free to apply to universities, although some do have a small application fee that you'll be able to find out about when you investigate that university a little more. There are a couple of institutions that are on the Common App Down Under, but it's very few. Predominantly, you will be applying direct to the university. And most universities will get back to you within about 2 or 3 weeks with a final outcome of your application, which is pretty cool. Both holistic and academic approaches to admissions decisions in the US you will find, whereas for us it is very much academic based. It is very, very rare for a school to require an essay or recommendation letter for admission into the program. We will just look at your test scores if the school is requiring that, and a lot of schools now are test optional because of COVID. And in that case, we will just look at your GPA for entry into the program. And that is because that's how Australian students are scored. And it's predominantly how it works for a lot of countries outside of the US as well, so not quite unique to us. And we go by the theory you're mature enough to decide if this is the right option for you, unlike the US schools that want to make that decision. I spoke a little bit above about the fast-tracked programs, but medicine, veterinarian science, law can all be done at undergraduate level Down Under. And finally, there are 200 schools outside of the US where you can use your US financial aid loans. And quite a few of those schools are in Australia and New Zealand as well. So you can go to that website below, and it tells you what schools are eligible for the US financial aid and GI Bill and Parent Plus loan, for example, and private loans as well. So there's a lot of really great options for funding a degree down under, which we will go into a little more detail at the end of the presentation.
Okay, so I'm Todd from the University of Melbourne, and I'm going just to touch a little bit on academic and student life, of how it's similar and different in Australia and New Zealand. So we did mention that the overwhelming majority of the universities are public and are very large by US standards. So you can anticipate that some of your core classes, introductory subjects, might have 200 students in a lecture. Even before the pandemic, we were putting lectures online, recordings. That was standard in Australia and New Zealand. One thing that I really like in the system in both Australia and New Zealand is that regardless of the class size, you're going to have a weekly tutorial. Tutorial could be a small group discussion of 20, 30 students, or a lab. So even though we're really large universities that are giving you lots of choice in terms of classes, you are still going to have that more interactive learning that you would find at a small liberal arts college in the United States. And Leanne has also touched upon that we tend to have fewer assessments and that they could be counted more heavily. And that the grading is really strict. When I went to study in graduate school in Australia, I heard all students talking about, yeah, they got a credit, which is like a 65% average. And I thought, what a bunch of underachievers. Well, you know, the top score of 85 or above, you really have to work to really achieve it. So they don't quite have the issue of grade inflation that we have in Australia. If you can go to the next slide, please. So what we would say is that we do value that you are going to be a more mature, independent learner. There are a lot of support services for you to reach out, whether it's talking about that you need help with academic skills, writing. Of course, there's going to be people to help you to decide on choosing a major, whether those are advisors or peer mentors. I think some of the other things that I love about Australia and New Zealand is that people are really laid back and friendly. You're on a first name basis with your professors, which takes a lot of getting used to, you know, but I think it just goes to showing that people are really very approachable. And also we'll get into the different academic year that we have, but that your summer breaks is actually going to be over what is the Christmas end of New Year break. Let's go to the next slide, please. So of course, going to uni, as we call it, is more than just going to classes. Of course, we're going to have an orientation for you, and many of our degrees allow you to start in either semester. So there's orientation for each semester, and core classes will kind of repeat each semester as well. And that you're also going to have a specific orientation for international students. There is accommodation on campus. We don't usually require you to live on campus. Australians and New Zealanders tend to stay local, but we do also have a lot of students coming interstate or from rural areas and obviously from overseas. So just to confuse you, we call the dormitories colleges, and this would be your only option if you want a meal plan. They also come with their own tutors. Sometimes they have their own scholarships. A lot of universities will also provide university student apartments. Other students will, you know, just share a house or a flat together. So of course, there's going to be lots of opportunities for clubs and societies. We want you to get involved. We do not have the fraternity or sorority system in Australia and New Zealand. So if you're talking about Greek life, we are talking about where do you go for good gyros and spanakopita, because we have lots of Greek immigrants. Sports are also a little bit different in that it's organized as a club. You can do everything from just kind of casual intramurals to participating in a citywide league, intervarsity sports as well. The scholarships, there might be scholarships for sports, but they tend to be like once you're already a student at that university. I think that's it in terms of student life. Oh yes, support learning differences as well. So we also, all of the services that you would find in the United States, you can find in Australia and New Zealand, whether that's if you have a physical disability or need help with extra time to take exam, there's going to be an extensive range of services available to you, which is actually required by law. I think that's it for academic and student life. And so now on to the next section. And I believe Tori is going to kick it off talking about how and when you apply. Thanks.
That's right. Thanks, Todd. So now we'll just talk a bit about the application process to Australian and New Zealand universities. And I'll start off by telling you a bit about how you as international students, so those who do not hold a Australian or New Zealand passport, would be applying to our universities. So as Leanne mentioned earlier, so we do have direct applications. So rather than applying through some consortiums or whatnot, you apply directly to the university you're interested in studying with. As Leanne also mentioned, often our universities do require SAT or ACT scores, and some also do require AP scores. So it's really important for you to know that, okay, once you've decided which university you want to study and which course or degree program you'd like to study, then you start to look at what are those entry requirements that will allow you to gain admission to the universities. At present, some of the universities do have flexible arrangements due to the difficulties with those standardized testing processes. I know at Deakin, we are currently still test optional. And so other universities are applying those same rules given the situation. Again, minimum GPAs and minimum requirements will vary depending on the course or degree program that you're looking at studying, and they will vary across universities. So again, very important for you to make sure that when you're reviewing which university and which program you want to apply for, that you're looking at what the SAT, ACT testing and GPA requirements are. And of course, you're fortunate enough to have people here in country on similar time zones to you that you can reach out to if you have any questions about those requirements. And most of them are very, very transparent. So what you would see that's published on the university's website is what you would need to get into that course. Yep. So again, as we touched on briefly before, the process for applying to our universities is quite different insofar as it really is largely based on your academic merit, and interviews, essays, extracurriculars would be considered in more of the areas of when you're applying for, let's say, a scholarship as opposed to admission. I'll hand it over now. I believe Leanne is going to cover the application process for those of you who may be Australian or New Zealand citizens.
Yeah, so the application process is a little bit different if you do hold a US or, an Australian or New Zealand passport, or if you have access to one. So if one of your parents is an Australian citizen and has an Australian passport or New Zealand, you do apply through a different system. They vary based on what state you would like to study in as well. So if you're thinking about going to Victoria, which is Deakin University Victoria's institution, or Melbourne, which is where Todd works, you would apply through VTAC, which is the Victorian Tertiary Admissions Centre. If you're thinking about going to Sydney, so Macquarie University, UNSW, or University of Sydney, for example, you would apply through UAC, which is the University Admissions Centre. And I think there's 5 different admission centres across Australia. So there's one for the southern states, the western, and Queensland as well. Nearly forgot about them. So you do need to go to those individual websites and find out their deadlines because they do vary. And some entry requirements are a little bit different for Australian students, so it's worth checking that out as well. But generally speaking, it is, again, a straightforward process, and we can help you if you are an Australian citizen, but we do recommend if you have access to an Australian passport that you do get it before you apply to the institutions, because it makes that much easier.
Kia ora, my name is Du Bois Jennings. I'm the Director of Engagement for Education New Zealand, and I'm just going to talk very briefly about the New Zealand application process. So similarly, like we just heard, you apply directly to each institution, and you require, institutions usually require a high school diploma with average grades around a B. In normal circumstances, students would need an SAT of 1200 or higher, or ACT of 24 or higher. But due to COVID, universities are being more flexible, with some institutions even going test optional or test free. So make sure you check with specific institutions. There are no application fees, or you don't need to submit essays or letters of recommendation. So again, in normal times, April and October would be the deadline to apply, but due to COVID, universities are being flexible. So please check with the website specifically. And like Australia, we're in the southern hemisphere, so our semester timings are different too. Semester 1 runs from February to June, and semester 2 typically from July to November, while our summer holidays run over Christmas and New Year's. And you typically have to do 3 to 4 papers, or those are what they call courses in New Zealand, a semester, to be considered full-time student. Next slide, please.
Okay, so I think now we are moving into the juicy bits, those things that people want to know that aren't often obvious when we're looking into options in terms of studying overseas. So how do we finance a degree in Australia or New Zealand? Is it even an option for those students who are looking at all of their options, both domestically and internationally? So I'll first start by talking about how we finance a degree in Australia. So one of the benefits of having a student visa in Australia is that you are allowed to work for up to 20 hours during the period of study where you're not, when you're in study periods, excuse me. So when you're outside of study periods, those weeks where you're not in term, you're able to work full time. As you probably have noticed by now, the Australian minimum wage is now $20.33 per hour, which is quite generous. So a lot of students are able to actually work and pay for their degree before they're even leaving the country. So as we mentioned, scholarships are available at most universities and are based on merit as opposed to need. So that's something to look at when you're applying, which universities have those scholarships and which GPA would let you qualify for those scholarships. The exchange rate is quite favorable. And another one of the benefits of the student visa is that it's a requirement when you have a student visa to study in Australia that you also have overseas healthcare insurance. And this is a really significant benefit that is often underappreciated, I think, because for the cost of the overseas health insurance, which varies depending on if you're coming by yourself or you have dependents or how long you need the coverage, but on average, you'd be paying around $2,000 for the duration of your study if you're a single student studying in Australia for your healthcare insurance, and that covers everything. So if you break your wrist, that covers the cost of seeing the doctor, the x-rays, any prescriptions you might need, and it is quite comprehensive. And so it's really one of those things that I think when you're making your overall decision is not to be sort of looked at lightly. Not only that, it's very pretty money in Australia. As you can see, the currency itself is quite unique once you're over there and making that Australian money. So I'll hand it over now to my colleagues in New Zealand to discuss financing a degree in New Zealand.
Thanks a lot. So in New Zealand, pretty similar. Undergrad students can work, but only over holiday breaks, and the minimum wage is $20 an hour New Zealand dollars, which is about $14.30 as of today. However, cost of things are not the same as they are in the US. Your dollar tends to go further in New Zealand for things like eating out and groceries. And also remember that it's not a tipping culture there. Like Australia, all international students must have medical insurance while they're in New Zealand. And if you're treated by a doctor, a nurse, or a counselor at like a student health center, provide your insurance information, and students can get all the payments covered by their insurance. All 8 universities offer all kinds of scholarships, both need and merit-based. And on our website, Study in New Zealand, we actually have like a search engine where you can search by different types of scholarships at different institutions. And as Leanne mentioned, US students are eligible to use direct loans from US Federal Student Aid Program at 4 of New Zealand's universities. So that's University of Auckland, University of Otago, Massey University, and Victoria University of Wellington. And these universities are also part of the Veterans Benefit Program, or the GI Bill.
So we just wanted to show you a comparison here of what it looks like in terms of the overall cost of a degree in Australia, as opposed to some universities, Australia and New Zealand, as opposed to some of the universities here in the US. And we've just picked a few. And of course, each university will have different fees, but this gives you a picture of what it would cost in terms of the breakdown of tuition, your accommodation, books and supplies, any transportation needs you might have per year, and then the total cost of the degree. So often we have people jump straight to that bottom line, and I think it's important to note that one of the reasons why an Australian or New Zealand degree is so much more affordable is that it is 3 years in duration most of the time, as opposed to that 4-year. But that also allows students to get out into the market and get working faster than their peers as well. So it gives you not only that advantage in terms of cost of acquisition of your degree, but then how quickly you can get out into the market to start earning money toward future use. So I think that that's what we were looking to cover today. And now we might just spend a few minutes telling you a little bit about each of our individual universities. And I will hand it over to Todd first from University of Melbourne to tell us a bit about University of Melbourne.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so Melbourne dates back to 1853, making it the second oldest university in Melbourne. We changed our curriculum about a decade though ago, in that I think we're really actually one of the only Australian universities that has actually something approaching a general education requirement. It's 25% of your studies. We call it breadth subjects, but it just means it's really flexible. Also, yeah, very comprehensive in terms of range of degrees you can study. However, anything leading to a professional accreditation like lawyer, doctor, vet, you have to do at the graduate level at Melbourne. So first you have to complete one of our 3-year undergraduate degrees. The only other thing that I would mention about Melbourne is that we are one of the few Australian universities that do require AP exams to meet our prerequisites. Also, we're located right in the heart of Melbourne, and yeah, Melbourne's a great city for food, for music. Sometimes we have 4 seasons in a day, but it's also really easy access to nature, as the city 7 times voted the most livable city in the world. I think we're ranked currently 2, which is not too bad. Okay, so that's a little of that. So maybe I'll throw it back to Tori, just staying in the Victoria Melbourne region.
Thanks, Todd. So like I said, I'm from Deakin University, which is also based in Melbourne. So we are a campus that has actually 4 physical locations. So our main campus is just about 20 minutes outside of the city of Melbourne. So it's more in an urban setting and has lovely surroundings. Deakin is a younger university, so established in the 70s, and has really moved up the international rankings since its start. Deakin is most well known for areas such as exercise and sports science, marine science, education, and nursing. We also have a medical program, and really we offer a comprehensive range of degrees, anything that you could be looking for. One thing I like to tell people about Deakin is when we started out as what was called a correspondence university, or really sending that educational material via distance to educate students. That history has come along with us, and as such, we have developed a number of in-house bespoke digital enhancements that really help the student navigate the educational environment, not only socially, but also educationally. So a lot of teaching resources and enhancements that make time management and accessing university education much more user-friendly, what you would be used to using these days in a technological world. And on that note, I will hand it over to Leanne, who will tell us a bit about Macquarie.
Awesome, thanks, Tori. So yeah, I represent Macquarie University, which is in Sydney, Australia. We are about 20 minutes from the downtown area of Sydney. So you have the best of both worlds, the big cosmopolitan city experience, as you can see behind me, with the wonderful world-class beaches. If you've ever seen Bondi Rescue, that is about an hour on the train from campus. And another really famous beach is Manly Beach, which is about 45 minutes from campus. So from the beaches, you can retreat back to campus, which is a stunning parkland university. We're home to 40,000 students, and of that, there are 12,000 international students. There's a lot going on campus, and the campus is designed for interaction and for a vibrant campus life. We have lots of clubs and associations, as you would expect from US schools, although I should have said previously, the NCAA doesn't exist outside of the US, but you can certainly get involved with a lot of sports if that's what you're interested into. If you're not, great, there's other options for you as well. We have 2 outdoor swimming pools, and I do like to point that out because our weather is somewhat similar to Southern California, if you're familiar. If it's below 60 degrees, we'll complain it's too cold. If it's above 90 degrees, we'll complain it's too hot. So we do like a very Mediterranean temperate climate in Sydney. Some of our most popular courses are our international business administration. We are very highly ranked in liberal arts like media and communication studies, and also fantastic cybersecurity and intelligence degrees. We specialize in software and telecommunications engineering, and fun fact for you, we actually invented Wi-Fi, so you're welcome. And our flagship program is our Bachelor of Clinical Science and Doctor of Medicine degree, which is the 6-year degree program outside of high school, where you can be a doctor at the end of it. And during that degree, you're able to come back to the US, do clinical placements at Dartmouth College and Washington St. Louis, which is 10 US medical schools. We are currently test optional and have rolling admission, so we welcome applications at any time of year. And the university has a goal of graduating global citizens. You are very much encouraged to go on a 3rd or 4th country experience as well. And with that, I will pass it over to New Zealand.
Thanks a lot, Leanne. We are with Education New Zealand. We're a government agency that is tasked with promoting all of the New Zealand institutions. So very briefly, I'm going to go through all 8 and just give you a rundown. But like my colleague Lewis said, I'm just going to talk about top ranked and most popular majors. You can study almost everything at all of these universities. So I'm going to go by city. And first up is Auckland. Like Lewis mentioned, the 4th most diverse city in the world. And we have the University of Auckland, which is ranked 84th. Some ranked subjects include archaeology, anthropology, law, and psychology. And University of Auckland is a massive university, a lot going on there. But when I visited, I was really blown away by its Unleashed space. It's a campus hub for like budding entrepreneurs, and it offers students free access to things like 3D printers, sewing machines, and all types of tools and design software for you to just kind of create anything. And they also offer workshops on like how to start a business or how to get a product or an idea off the ground. And this is all free to students. There's also Auckland University of Technology, or AUT. It boasts a really strong computer science department where students design software for things like VR and flight path technology and earthquake detection. But in addition to tech disciplines, they also have a highly ranked art and design major. And AUT also offers incredible courses that give students an in-depth understanding of Maori culture and Indigenous leadership. Next, over to Hamilton, New Zealand. It's called Maori King Country because it has really deep Maori roots there. The first Maori king was actually established there. So you can really study and learn a lot about New Zealand's Indigenous people there. And it has the highest percentage of Maori students on any university. But it also has close connections with major industries and business all over New Zealand, like shipping and farming. It has a Triple Crown accredited business school and has majors like computer science, sociology, and English literature. Next, we'll go on to Palmerston North, or the Rose City, kind of a small college town feel, and it's home to Massey University. Massey actually has 3 main campuses. They have one in Auckland, one here in Palmerston North, and one in the capital, Wellington, which I'll talk about next. But Massey has a stellar animal and veterinary sciences program. Some of its other ranked subjects are geography, engineering, and environmental sciences, but also has a strong media program with close connections to New Zealand's film industry. Next, we have Wellington. It's the capital city of New Zealand. And it has the Victoria University of Wellington, which has 3 campuses. Ranked subjects include earth and marine sciences, economics, film, also a Triple Crown accredited business school. And because it's in New Zealand's capital, it has a strong political science department with courses that have students actually engaging and visiting the Capitol building. And next I'll go to Christchurch. It's a smaller, kind of quieter city compared to Auckland and Wellington. It has 2 universities there. First, the University of Canterbury, a really large research university, accounting and finance, engineering, also a Triple Crown accredited business school, but it's also home to the Student Volunteer Army. This is a student-run organization that does outreach and service projects in the city of Christchurch. Christchurch had a massive earthquake many years ago, and also most recently there was a terrorist attack where a mosque was attacked there, and the Student Volunteer Army actually went into the communities on both occasions to assist people. Also in Christchurch, you have Lincoln University. It's a land-based university. It has kind of a mission or motto to feed the world. So it has ranked subjects in things like agricultural programs, viticulture or winemaking, landscape architecture, forestry, and environmental studies. And the university offers many research opportunities where students kind of combine the latest technological developments to improve the ways land is used and goods are distributed. And finally, we have Dunedin, which is called the Edinburgh of the South because the city was actually modeled after the Scottish city of Edinburgh, and it's home to University of Otago, really large institution, very old feel, picture Oxford or Hogwarts even, very old looking buildings, has ranked subjects in physiology, law, chemistry, has the only dentistry school in New Zealand, also theology. And the University of Otago has a really well-renowned medical program. It's one of the few institutions that actually still uses real cadavers for research. And that's it for the 8 New Zealand institutions.
All right. That was a lot of really terrific information. So thanks to all of you. I want to come visit. I know that much. It was really, really helpful. And we actually do have a student from last year who's now attending somewhere in Australia. I'm not actually sure where she ended up, but I'm going to reach out to her and see how she's doing. And she is Australian. So she was fortunately able to get in this year with, even with the border closing. But we're so hopeful that things will be fairly normal next year. So, this can be open to any of our students. All these institutions sound amazing. And both countries just sound like such incredible, rich, exciting places. And so I really hope that our students will consider it. I thank you all. Is there anyone who wants to add any last comments? Nope. Okay. And I want to point out one last thing, which is, on the slide with all the costs for our students to just notice, UCLA was on there, and in-state for 4 years was still roughly like $133,000. Both of these options are cheaper than that. Like, think about that. If you're down the road at UC Santa Cruz or UC Berkeley, you're not getting on a plane. It's still cheaper to go study in Australia and New Zealand. So just for some financial perspective, a pretty amazing opportunity, because students often think that going abroad is going to cost a fortune, and they're quite shocked to learn that it's generally a fraction of what we pay here, particularly for private colleges. But even with some of our California state institutions, it's extremely competitive and often even less. So pretty amazing. And lastly, I want to just remind students that this process, may seem really kind of big and scary in the beginning. And there is a lot to learn and a lot to research and think about. But as you can see here, there are faces behind each of these universities and places. And when you're looking at international admissions, it's so personalized compared to when you're applying to wherever in the US, whether it's UC or CSU or other places. A lot of times you're a number and you're an application, and sometimes you can get to a person, but really for every international institution that I have interacted with to plan this event, there is genuinely a person there who really, really wants to help students and connect with them and help them understand what this experience is going to be and answer questions. And they really want students and their parents to feel comfortable with this whole thing and to understand what it is that they're walking into. You know, when they get off that plane in Australia or New Zealand, what should they be expecting? And of course, you know, it's an adventure, and there's going to be some, you know, challenges just getting used to a new place, and that's all fairly normal. But there's so much support beforehand and on the ground. And I encourage students to view our presentations from earlier in the month. We had like an intro to international study presentation, which is quite general and not about any particular country. We also had a really wonderful presentation about student life, like thriving abroad, and just some of the things to think about. We're going to have an affordability one. We had to reschedule it, but about cost. And then we're going to have one next week that I think is going to be really super about employability, because that is a topic that students have a lot of questions about, and it sort of depends where you are. And in many countries, as you mentioned here as well, you can stay and work for a while. And so it's really important to understand what are the opportunities that students can have to stay abroad and work and have internships and things like that. So we're going to have a session dedicated to that, because it's really important for students to understand like what's next after they graduate. So definitely check those out. Thanks again to all of you for being with us today. And we just really, really appreciate you being here for our students, and have a great rest of your day.